afternoon, everyone. We're pretty lucky to have some excellent panelists today to talk about serverless, not just for startups. I guess the business value of serverless is not always obvious until you actually work in it, and we have some, hopefully we'll give you some practical tips on how to make the most of serverless in your organisation or even get started if that's an issue. So I've got some questions from our panelists, but if you have any questions you would like to ask the panelists, please look out for Lars, and Rafi's got a mic as well, and I'll try and communicate that so we can get to those. Okay, so let's introduce each panelist. So first off, we've got Emily Shea.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Shea. I lead global go-to-market for application integration at AWS. And so what that means is that I and my team work with some of AWS's largest customers to adopt a lot of the AWS serverless services that we've talked about today. So EventBridge, Step Functions, SQS, and SNS.
And we've got Pete Hanssens.
Yep, so I run Cloud Shuttle, a serverless data platform engineering cloud consultancy. So we basically make getting started with data engineering in a serverless manner a bit more accessible to everyday folks.
And AWS Serverless Hero as well.
AWS Serverless Hero, I keep forgetting that. It is a true honour.
And community builder Michael Walmsley.
Hi, Michael Walmsley. I work for Accenture. I'm a serverless architect, and I've been running serverless enablement for the last couple of years within Accenture, within a product group. So effectively more of a product engineer within Accenture, building on serverless.
Can we start off with a fun fact? What was your first programming computer and year that you started programming? Go, Emily.
So mine was incredibly recent. I think 2019 was when I wrote my first Python code and first Lambda function. I really kind of stumbled into the technology industry and into this wonderful world of serverless. And that was kind of one of my first things that I wanted to do, was just get hands-on and kind of learn to code and be able to build it with it myself as I was getting started. I think many of us in this room are familiar with that feeling of kind of feeling it click and just becoming really passionate about it. But so 2019, relatively recently.
Yeah, I was a late bloomer myself, actually. So first computer was like a 486, I think, but I didn't really start deving much until I got myself a MacBook Pro probably in about 2015 or so, yeah.
Okay, so like some people earlier today, I'm going to be showing my age here. I did not, my first computer was not what did you say, an x84, 486. My first computer, I've been in computing for a very, very long time. It feels like most of my, entirely long time. My first computer was a Commodore 64. I started with doing basic programming, and I used to do a whole lot of register manipulations to manipulate sprites and do some really simple blob 8-bit animations. That's when I started on computing a very, very long time ago.
I also was a Commodore 64 person myself, so I understand. So let's kick off and sort of level set a little bit. What is your definition of the serverless mindset? And if you say it's just code running on servers, you will be leaving the building.
You will not be invited back.
That's right.
I would say that most simply I can put it is that it's companies that have really taken the single-minded focus on delivering business value and making great products for their customers and kind of shedding anything that's not helping them meet that goal.
Yes, I think I agree. It's like focusing on, a bit like what Jeremy said this morning, on focusing on business logic and not really putting too much focus around putting this amazing technical way of deploying that thing or where it's hosted and stuff like that. It's really just on the business logic.
Serverless mindset. I actually don't like using the word serverless anymore. I love serverless, but I think there's so many different definitions out there. I'm preferring a lot of the communications coming out now saying event-driven. I think for me, serverless applications is delivering business value through event-driven, decoupled solutions. That's what I think it means.
Cool. So I guess sometimes, speaking from experience here, it's hard to get serverless adoption in your organisation. So what sorts of challenges do you think prevent sort of wider serverless adoption in organisations?
Yeah, so I definitely think serverless is a really revolutionary technology. And so naturally there are hurdles to kind of getting that mind share from others that haven't really kind of seen the power of it, and they're kind of more attached to an older way of building things. I think there is a lot of kind of just that mindset shift that people need to embrace, whether that's moving from more of kind of a synchronous development model to an asynchronous one, or going from building and writing everything yourself in code to moving to more of a serviceful way of building and choosing the right, do I need Event Bridge for this, or do I need SQS for this? I think all of those shifts are, they can be big ones for people to take on. And in a lot of cases, I feel like I found that it really takes like one person or just a small group of people within an organization to really embrace it and say, hey, this is powerful, to really kind of drive that change within a larger organization.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on with that sentiment in the sense that a lot of organizations even find embracing the cloud, even in 2023, quite a challenge. And I've had it with quite a few of my customers. They're just hanging on to on-prem like there's no tomorrow. And I guess it's just showing them, having a few champions, pocking a few things out, showing them the pathway, doing some brown bag sessions and the like. I think it's like events like this, evangelizing, getting the word out about serverless within organizations. That's really how to win the battle, and also just lowering the barrier to entry, having those platform teams, creating the patterns that make it super easy for development squads within the organization just to pick it up and use these little patterns to solve certain problems.
Sorry, man, I forgot the question.
Oh,
That's bad, isn't it?
what do you think are the main challenges preventing wider serverless adoption in organisations?
So I think from an enterprise perspective, some of the challenges that I think I see is the enterprise mindset is stuck on reproducing solutions through patterns, and those patterns are often set in stone. So what you're trying to do is change a complete thinking and mindset of going to a completely new set of patterns. And I get a lot of resistance from people. There's a lot of Kubernetes in the world of enterprise. And I've often had people come to me and go, why would you use serverless? I can only run 1,000 of those things at one time. And I kind of look at that and go, well, it's more than that. So I think getting through that, like Peter and Emily have been saying, it's about opening up those communication channels and talking and getting people to understand what it actually means. I think that comes back to more of that mindset that we'll keep talking about as well.
Yeah. Don't forget, if you've got any questions, just raise your hand and we'll get a mic up to you. So, say I'm in an organisation that is finding it hard to probably embrace cloud or serverless. How could I kick off the conversation with my manager or some key stakeholder about adopting cloud and or serverless technologies?
Yeah, so I think that some of the things that I've seen work well is kind of getting in there and starting out with maybe like a proof of concept or a prototype, something that solves an actual kind of business problem that you might be facing and that's built in a serverless way. Because I do think that serverless is one of the things that you kind of have to see and to actually see a real world use case to really understand the power of. And so getting out and kind of building an example of like, hey, this is kind of where I want to take things can be really helpful to make that real. I also think that arming yourself with stories about ways that other massive enterprises are using serverless, because we have a ton of amazing, and that's actually a big part of my job, is to kind of promote those customers that are out there at the forefront of their industry and are doing really cool things with serverless. So if you're a retail customer, maybe drawing on some of the really cool things that Lego has spoken about at reInvent, or thinking about some of the experiences of Capital One or Fidelity and some of these financial services customers, I think those can really demonstrate that, hey, this is real and there's real companies out there that are building massive production workloads with serverless.
Yeah, I think showcasing the art of the possible is also a really great technique. We can see it here with AWS. They've got serverless espresso. You would sort of, you can't really, bit of a plug, but obviously, like it's a really great showcase of what serverless can actually do. It can, and I think that's one of the techniques that we can use as developers. Doing hackathons and the like, building some small, discrete solutions for some of the organizational challenges, perhaps, and showcasing them and doing brown bag sessions and things, and slowly sort of winning over those managers and senior executives with, let's face it, a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Like with all the security issues around serverless and stuff like that, which just simply aren't true.
Yeah, well, my experience in enterprise is a little bit different because I work for a consulting company, but I'm actually working as an inwardly focused product group, which is a very different mindset. But again, what was being said here is it's a matter of showcasing what serverless can do. As an example, I've only been with Accenture for 2 years, but one of the things that Accenture, the group that I work within, is they run technical boot camps within Accenture. And we get university students who are finishing their degrees who have had zero access to cloud. And they come into a 4-day intensive boot camp and they build projects. And my boss, Luke Higgins, wanted to turn around and go, hey, can serverless be really quick to build? Can people learn to build this quickly? So I actually turn up to these now and I run a 45-minute session to demystify the cloud and run a very quick intro and demo of building serverless. And by the end of it, I think by the end of 3 days, all these students are just doing infrastructure as code, pushing up serverless solutions. They're building Lambda code, they're pushing API gateway, DynamoDBs, and they're building full front-end backing applications really quickly. And doing that as a showcase of from zero knowledge to a really great product within 3 or 4 days intensively is an amazing showcase. And that really helps convince a lot of people that, hey, serverless really does have legs, because from zero to fantastic solutions in less than 3 days with zero experience is an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, it's a good way of learning and sharing the skills within the organisation. Something pretty useful. What are some tips on how to get your team skilled up in serverless, like resources, websites, anything like that?
Yeah, so Eric mentioned earlier, Serverless Land is an amazing repository for lots of AWS resources. We also just recently launched a bunch of great new serverless content on AWS Skill Builder, which is completely free kind of learning paths and digital learning badges to get folks ramped up on it. But then I also always go back to kind of my own experience of just getting in there and building something yourself, taking advantage of the marvelous free tier and all the things that you can kind of use to solve your own problems. I think that's a phenomenal way to learn serverless.
Yeah, I completely agree. I can't advocate for serverless land any more than I can say it's just amazing. I actually reference it quite a lot in my day-to-day work as well. But having a platform engineering team coming up with patterns within the organization that you can quickly pick up and implement and sort of utilize to build more complicated serverless applications is a great way to lower the barrier. And just brown bag sessions, I think, is really critical.
Brown bag sessions. I love brown bag sessions. Large part of what I do at Accenture is for 1.5 years, I ran a weekly session called Serverless Works within Accenture to demystify and basically get people on board with building serverlessly. And to do that, I introduced, from my own experiences, I've been building serverless for about 6 years, 7 years, for a long time. But part of what I did was I started introducing, we're talking about my experience of how to build, introducing tools. I do a lot of live coding. I've done so much live coding in these sessions that I'm addicted to live coding, which is cool. It's a lot of fun. But the other thing I did was I actually started inviting in other experts from the world, from within the world. So we've invited people like Atalessa, who's the creator of AWS Lambda Power Tools, to come and talk to us for an hour about Power Tools, run a demo. So I've had quite a number of guests into my session. So from an evangelization perspective inside an enterprise, I think it's really critical to get that message across, open those lines of communication, try and create a community around the knowledge and grow that through Serverless Land, which is an amazing resource. And also the work that David Boyne's doing about event-driven at the moment. If no one's looked at it, serverlessland.com, look at what David Boyne's doing with his event-driven visualizations. It's amazing.
Cool. All good ideas there. Does anyone have any questions? Don't be shy. Put your hand up. We'll get a mic to you. Oh, we've got one.
Yeah, thank you. You have been talking about building new stuff in serverless. What about migrating old stuff, maybe in the cloud, to serverless? Can I migrate a Kubernetes cluster into serverless?
That's a fantastic question. Who wants to take that one?
Thought you'd go easy on us, mate.
I think Microsoft says yes based on what Jeremy said earlier today. I think it comes down to, I think when you talk about Kubernetes, I mean, that's just a containerization of an application. So we need to acknowledge that's containerization. And I think in the same word, and hopefully the security guards won't come and drag me out of the building, Lambda is just another form of containerization, people. So let's not be too coy about what we're doing here, right? The similarities between containerization and Lambda is the similarities, differences. But I think essentially you can break down. I mean, if you've got a large Kubernetes monolith, and hopefully it's not a monolith if it's on Kubernetes, hopefully it's microservices. Most enterprises, in my experience, build monolithic microservices. And it really comes down to breaking down those barriers of the domains of an application to choose the bits that make sense to be serverless. Because in Kubernetes, it makes sense to have infrastructure at times for workloads that aren't spiky, that need constant processing or high-powered processing. Not all workloads are going to work in serverless, and we have to acknowledge that. I'm not sure if that answered specifically your question, but it's about breaking down the monoliths.
Does that help? Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
I think it's probably,
It's good.
Yeah, I would just add that I do think that in any kind of real-world customer example that customers that I work with, they do end up using a combination of containers and serverless. And there's different places where it does make sense to introduce a container, to have something that's longer running, or something that you maybe ported over from somewhere else. I think that's one of the cool things that we're seeing with kind of the event-driven architectures aspect of that is the fact that you can have events that are passing between microservices that are running in different types of compute. And so there's ways to kind of bring the two together. And there's definitely a place for containers in kind of real-world use cases.
If I may, am I allowed to answer too? I'll just quickly say, I think the cloud has many sort of platform solutions, and it's a matter of starting at the top. You know, developers inherently would be lazy, and they want as much stuff taken care of for them as possible. And serverless is a great way of doing that. And then you sort of go down the layers, you know, the cost-benefit analysis, every solution that gets designed, there's always a cost-benefit analysis of, you know, is this the right solution? Sometimes serverless will be the right solution, many times it will be, but sometimes, you know, you might have to go to other technologies. And I don't know if that gentleman had my notes, but that leads me to my next question. How do I answer the push to Kubernetes in an organisation? So organisations are very siloed a lot of the time, especially the large ones that I deal with, and I think Emily deals with as well. Kubernetes is a lot of the time an obvious platform to bring into the organisation because the infrastructure teams are knowledgeable about that sort of thing, and it makes sense to them. So what are some ways that we can answer that push to Kubernetes?
Yeah, I do think that at the moment, we're having so many conversations with customers, just given kind of economic trends and all these things that are going on around cost optimization as a massive, massive focus. And I do think that it gives us kind of a unique opportunity to be able to take a look at some of those Kubernetes platforms or ideas about kind of building a much larger platform that we need to maintain to be able to run containers, and just revisit them and say, is this really adding value to the business? Is this where we want to kind of be putting our biggest amount of focus with the incredible squeeze that we have on resources at the moment? Another thing that I think is really critical to bring up with as you're having these kind of discussions is I think that there's a lot of kind of hidden benefits to serverless that don't really jump out at you. So if you think about some of the tasks that go into managing a massive kind of maybe containers-based platform is the challenge of kind of preparing for a large-scale event that you need to scale up for. With serverless, that's all happening in the background for you. Or kind of the patching and the maintenance and all those bits that are kind of calling you in the middle of the night. And serverless just eliminates all of those. So it's kind of the hidden benefits that you maybe need to draw out when you're looking at kind of the decision between the two.
Yeah, I think when we look at Kubernetes, a lot of the sort of, I guess, what the arguments that are put forward is there's a cost argument that if you've got very steady workloads at high volumes, serverless becomes really, really expensive. But let's face it, who is always at 100% utilization? And then the other one is like a latency argument. Say if you're in high frequency trading, for instance, you need, sub-millisecond latencies and things. And so you've got Kubernetes, Kafka, yada, yada, yada. And at that point, that's fair enough. Like there are some workloads where you should be looking at containerized solutions, running your own Kafka clusters, maybe using Aerospike or something like that. But they've probably got the development teams in-house to actually handle all of that. So really just looking at your workloads, understanding what they actually are, whether they're suitable for serverless versus Kubernetes, but also, or a containerized approach, should I say, because the truth be told is Kubernetes isn't actually the easiest way to run a container. So there's a lot of other cheaper, App Runner and things like that you can reach for if you do have those high volume workloads and things like that. And so lots of different considerations there. But I think really, I think people put these arguments forward towards us to say, hey, hang on a second, you've got all of these issues with serverless and stuff like that. We should flip the conversation back onto them and say, hang on a second, what actually is your SLA? Because you'll be surprised, a lot of these folks probably don't have a very solid answer to that question, in my humble experience.
Oh, the K word. Well, it's a hard one in enterprise. I'm working at Accenture, right? It's probably the biggest user in the world of Kubernetes, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of Kubernetes around.
Just don't show them the recording.
No. My main push there is how many systems do we actually build that need to run, some things need to run 24/7, but a lot of the time, if you actually looked at the utilization of Kubernetes clusters on a lot of systems that we build, if you go into banks and things, they're not always running 24/7. But they are. Your system may not be functioning 24/7. You might have events flowing full throttle 24/7. There's peaks and loads. And I think that's the conversation you need to look at is, well, what is the total cost of ownership of a solution? And in our experience, I'm talking to some of the people, some of my leadership, and where I am at the moment, in the group we're in, I think there's a figure of about 60 to 70% of the total cost of our group is in maintaining clusters for Kubernetes. So that's mad. When you're not necessarily running constant workloads. We're not all Netflix, we're not all Facebooks. We've got to be realistic about what we're doing. We keep engineering things like we are, but in reality, most solutions we're not. And I think that's where we need to be refocusing the conversations.
Yeah, cool. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, we've got one down the front here. Oh. I think there's a couple.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just want to see what's the panel view for security perspective in the serverless world. What's your view? Is it eliminating or adding the more complexity for the security people? Thank you.
Who wants to take that one?
I'll have a little stab at it. So I think there's a lot of, IAM can be complex at times, but I think it's a lot less complicated than sort of all of the complexity around rolling out your own networking and all the different mechanisms that you need in order to secure workloads, IP-based workloads. Oftentimes people forget that AWS have achieved certain certifications when you're running workloads on Lambda functions and things like that. And that's all available to you within the console. And so when you're trying to get those workloads certified, that just comes just out of the box. So a lot of the heavy lifting's already done for you. Whereas, getting other workloads certified when you're rolling your own requires a huge amount of effort. So I think from the perspective from that front, it's just a no-brainer that serverless is actually I mean, it's like anything in life, you know, you can misconfigure anything. So there's probably an argument for all cases, but specifically, I think, you know, AWS have done an incredible amount of heavy lifting. I think just to add, you know, to the previous question, I think Simon Wardley used to come out with this question a lot. How many of us have rolled our own auth service in the past? And now there's things like Auth 0, right? And now what we're all doing is we're all rolling out our own platform engineering teams on top of Kubernetes, and we're reinventing cloud providers. And, you know, it's a lot of duplication of effort, and it's really not adding much value to our actual business itself. Anything you could add?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also add that we have a lot of awesome proof points of kind of serverless applications that do need to run in highly secure environments. Thinking about some of the workloads that we have that need to run in kind of very heavily regulated industries. One really cool one that we've shared a bit about is a Nationwide Children's Hospital, where they're doing large-scale genomic analysis for treating children's cancer. All of that is kind of running into step functions and EventBridge and Lambda and these different services. So there's some great proof points if that does become kind of a question that you're needing to talk about with people if they're asking that of you.
Cool. There's another question here, I believe.
Thanks. I guess my question is around portability and standardization. So now we get these questions around, okay, what if we don't want to get locked with AWS and want to move our serverless solution to another provider? So we ask ourselves, is there standards? We have a persistent layer that now is different. It's, you know, DynamoDB has its own APIs. We used to have SQL that you can move to different places as standard. Now, I guess I want to know from you if you know about the latest standards, or if the industry is working on them between AWS, Microsoft, Google. What's your take on that possibility of moving the cloud solutions, serverless solutions, to different clouds?
A great question.
Vendor lock-in. There it is, vendor lock-in. That's a hard one, right? It's not easy. When you say you want to, because this is something like, as a person who's working with serverless in enterprise, that is a question that comes up for some solutions. Is, you know, we want to use it for people, our customers on AWS, or they only want to use Azure. Everyone has a particular flavor of cloud they like. So I often come back to, well, yeah, it's important to be able to deliver solutions on all the clouds when you're a large consulting or enterprise with customers everywhere. Whether you need a solution on every cloud, but I mean, if I look at it now, it comes back to software architecture. I mean, there's ways of isolating your architecture, your software, your domain-driven business code from the cloud. And I actually blogged about this last year on my blog. If you want to check that out, you can catch me later and I'll give you some pointers. But there's this view of hexagonal architecture for architecting your software, which can isolate your business domain logic from your external dependencies. And if you're doing that, then your business logic is your business value. And you can then bind that to other clouds. And I'm actually going to start blogging about that this year as well, because that's of particular interest to me.
Do you have anything to say, Pete? Any other questions? Yep, there's one there.
Where would you like to see serverless in the next 5-10 years? How do you feel personally about it?
Yeah, I think that the trend that I'm particularly excited about, just coming from kind of the application integration space, is the whole theme of event-driven architectures. And just, I think that obviously event-driven architectures aren't kind of a new concept. We've been building with like enterprise service buses and messages and queues for the longest time. But the power that we now have with all these serverless services that are invoked by events and emit events by default is just a complete game changer in kind of what we're able to do with event-driven architectures. I think there's plenty of room for us to kind of evolve and develop the services and the tools that we have to solve some of the problems around kind of observability and debugging and all these challenges that come up with asynchronous and distributed systems. So I think that's the direction that I'm super excited about and interested in kind of problem solving about in the next few years.
Yeah, for me, it's, I guess, infrastructure from code, a bit like what Jeremy Daly was talking about. I think there's a a lot of complexity with the ever-growing number of services across all of the various cloud providers. And so we're having to become IAM experts and I guess gluing experts, if you will, and also decision point experts. We're needing to figure out, is Kinesis or Event Bridge, SQS, SNS, which is the best one for this particular, asynchronous pattern or something like that. And so if there's, I guess, some cloud compilers there for us that allow us to sort of take away all of those decision points, lower the barrier to entry for folks, and also just, I don't know whether it's all that useful for me to be an IAM expert, actually. Like, I kind of am because I run a consultancy and I know all of the things to configure. I think CDK has done a lot. It's got like safe defaults and stuff like that, or sane defaults. But I think the cloud providers and different tooling and stuff like that should take away a lot of that heavy lifting and just allow developers to be developers, if you will. Yeah.
In the next 5 to 10 years, I'm really looking forward to the real serverless revolution, when I can go, Alexa, I would love to have a service that was event-driven that could process all the data that comes from my API and put it into a data warehouse, and it would go off and it would talk to Jeremy Daly's fantastic AMPS platform, and it would write it would go to ChatGPT and get the code written for me and deploy that directly on AMPS, and I wouldn't have to do anything. I could do that anywhere I was. I could be sitting on the beach, having a pina colada. That is my future dream of serverless.
It's hard, right? There's so many services. It's just going to get more complex. Hopefully there'll be ways to make that simpler. I guess with more power comes more complexity potentially, but there's a bit of a balance there. Any other questions? Yep, we've got one there.
Hi, good morning. My question is around as we proceed with more serverless driven ecosystems across the world, there's a lot of promotion as well. What do you guys think if EC2 service can coexist with serverless? Would that in future, these services wouldn't be available as an offer from AWS, or they would die? What sort of, what do you reckon?
I think we're a long way away from EC2 dying.
It depends on your promotion, right? You push more customers towards serverless, people stop using, finding the real value in EC2 unless until they're really dependent on it.
I think that it's interesting. I think being in kind of a very serverless community, we are kind of at the forefront of the industry in this kind of move to really very modern and cloud native applications. And so I think that it's easy for us to kind of forget the fact that we're really leading the charge, and there's so many applications and so many things that people are building that are still maybe even on-prem, and kind of that whole push is definitely going to take us a long time and kind of a large kind of evolution. And so it's super cool to be at the very forefront of it, but there's definitely a long way to go and a lot of folks to bring along with us.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think initially AWS was very developer focused, and now it's becoming more and more so enterprise focused, but also it's kind of the backbone or the foundation on which many SaaS businesses are building their foundations on. And so I think, potentially will everyday developers always interface with AWS directly, or will it be through things like AMPT and the Serverless Inc. Framework and stuff like that? Not too sure what the future holds, but I think for those SaaS platforms, we heard from Memento in their talk last night at the meetup, they were talking about how they've built it entirely off EC2. So I think there will always be EC2 around. It's just, perhaps everyday consumers won't be interfacing with it much at all.
Any other questions? All right. Oh, yep.
We hear a lot about people who want to move to serverless and like the actual starting like a serverless project, but for customers that you have have like a large workload already on serverless or have built substantially on serverless, what's the challenges that that usually see, and what's the operational environment for them look like compared to, say, just someone running EC2 on cloud or a majoritively on-prem business?
Awesome question.
So once you start running serverless, right, we've got to acknowledge that you're running a distributed system. So your complexities already amp up for the fact that your compute is now distributed across multiple places. And that's what happens in serverless. So I think at the end of the day, the complexity there is about trying to standardize what you do with your code when you're writing code in serverless. And that's where frameworks like AWS Lambda Power Tools becomes really powerful, and it can give you a single conduit into your logging and observability. It gives you the ability to push custom metrics out, which are the things that people don't focus on when they're writing code. I think a lot of the problems that people have when they move to serverless or start building lots of serverless is they don't think about that observability. And I think Alan Hanssens wrote about this last year, and he wrote about observability first. And I think we're getting to that. If we have that as a mindset, as part of that mindset, event-driven first, observability first, you start to break down those barriers to make it more accessible and more observable, because it is complicated.
Yeah, I'll just add that, serverless can get pretty complicated quite quickly, the sprawl of microservices and the like. So I think Lambda Power Tools is a fantastic way that, you can inject sort of distributed tracing with your events, trying to trace an event from, one Lambda invocation through to SNS and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of tooling challenges still to be solved. Serverless isn't like, we're at the, I guess, complete maturity. I think it's definitely getting there, but there's a lot of tooling to come, in and around that sort of space. I think, truth be told, I think, in all fairness, AWS are doing a fantastic job to address a lot of these issues, but I think there's a lot more to come in that space. That's absolutely for sure. And it was just great to see, the Power Tools capability coming out to address a lot of these sort of challenges and stuff like that. Also, testing, I think, is another one. But I think, they're listening from my perspective. It definitely looks like it, and they're sort of addressing testability around sort of step functions and event bridge and the like. So I think, the future's bright.
Yeah, I think Power Tools is an amazing resource. I also see that a lot of the kind of very advanced serverless and event-driven customers will do a lot of kind of best practices and pattern sharing. So maybe they have like a serverless interest group or serverless expert group within them that are kind of building CDK or SAM patterns that then different developers in the organization can pick up and use. Another tool that's been really helpful is kind of having some standardization around your event schemas as you're passing events around. I know we mentioned Dave Boyne. He's also built the event catalog, which is a really cool resource. But I think that kind of collaboration and sharing of best practices across an organization definitely becomes much more important as you're starting to build serverless applications across the board.
Yeah, that's a great question to finish the panel with. So help me thank the guests, Emily, Pete, and Michael.